What's going on, people? My name is Batman. And after Destiny released the Dark Below DLC, many vanilla players who opted not to buy said DLC were upset to find that the daily story missions, weekly heroic strike, and the weekly nightfall strike were all restricted to DLC content, meaning that vanilla players could not access these parts of the game that week. They could not obtain the rewards that everybody loves so much from those particular playlists. For that week, and for any future week where weeklies or nightfalls are restricted to DLC content, their vanilla games are a little more obsolete than they otherwise would be had they bought the DLC. Now, it would be very easy for Bungie to address this problem simply by having a different weekly or nightfall appear for vanilla players, but they choose not to because that obsolescence is planned. Because that little bit of obsolescence is that much extra incentive to buy the DLC, and that's what this all comes down to. A lot of people have been asking me how I felt about the upgrade materials patch that now lets players use their Vanguard and Crucible marks to purchase 20 Spirit Blooms or Spin Metal or what have you. That patch now lets players skip through what I have previously complained about as the most tedious and life-wasting part of this game, farming those caves. Now, to be honest, and at the risk of sounding like an arrogant know-it-all, I was expecting this patch, and I knew exactly when they would release it too, right before the DLC. What this patch basically is the same kind of deal that you get in World of Warcraft these days, where you can instantly skip to level 90 so you have a character strong enough for the DLC. The update to material farming is just a clever way to streamline progression in the base game, so that anyone who buys the base game in the future, or anyone who has already bought the game but still has to go a ways before they're strong enough for the DLC raid, will progress through the base vanilla game as quickly as possible, and thus buy the DLC that much sooner, because most people aren't going to purchase new content until they've completed the content they already have. And so it's important to Activision that they complete that content which they already own as soon as possible, before another game comes along and steals their attention. Somewhat ironically, this update now completely defeats any purpose whatsoever of going into the quote-unquote open worlds in Destiny. There is now literally not one meaningful task worth taking the time to accomplish in the open world unless you're doing bounties. And we know that the goal was to speed up only your playtime on the vanilla game because they purposely had new mechanics put in place as a sort of counterbalance to ensure that it didn't speed up your progression in the DLC, right? The exotic shards and radiant materials that are only obtainable from the Crota raid or from her vendor, but you have to be level 4, which takes a ridiculous amount of time to achieve. What they were worried about was that the new materials exchange, combined with the massive amount of Ascendant shards and energy that people had racked up in their time with the vanilla game, diligently completing the weekly raids and nightfalls and such, would allow said players to progress through the DLC and upgrade all their shit too fast. And if you did progress through it too fast, you might recognize just how little content there actually is. So they devised a plan for all that Ascendant material, and a lot of the work you put into acquiring them, to become obsolete. Not completely obsolete, but basically obsolete in regards to the DLC. Obsolete enough so that they can ensure you're still reaching that target amount of playtime set in their project goals for the DLC. Now, I've touched on planned obsolescence before, most notably in the Destiny vs. Advanced Warfare video, where I essentially accused both games of intentionally watering themselves down in order to make sure people still bought the other one. And in that video, in the comments, I saw a lot of people calling me a conspiracy theorist, as they do in many of my videos where I accuse Activision of inappropriate behavior, and I think that accusation, the tinfoil hat claim, often prompts many members of the audience to laugh the whole thing off. This accusation immediately discredits whatever it is I'm saying, even without any evidence to the contrary, and because of those accusations, I've been hesitant to make this video in particular, because I was worried nobody would believe me, and people would just, call me a conspiracy theorist again, and think I'm dredging up shit, and think I'm crazy or whatever. However, I saw Drifter post a video about this topic, and people seem to be receptive to it. They seem to go along with it, and I suspect that many of the same types of people who subscribe to me also subscribe to him. I thought, well, maybe I'll get away with it too. But I think it's important to emphasize that corporations and conspiracy go together like peanut butter and fucking jelly. I'm not even an anti-capitalist. I'm pro-capitalism. I really am. But I'm also a pragmatist. Price fixing is when two companies selling the same product or service intentionally raise the price of said product or service together in unison, thus fixing the market in a way that the consumer can only find said product or service at that high price. destroys the whole point of the free market while significantly boosting the profits of those companies involved, because they can jack the price up of their product and people won't be able to go anywhere else to get it. So they won't get punished, basically, for jacking the price up of their product the way you're supposed to get punished. The way Xbox got punished for trying to sell their shit at $500. It is a textbook conspiracy. And speaking of textbook conspiracies, you want a textbook case of planned obsolescence? College fucking textbooks. Alright? That shit is a scam. They, new edition every year. They have this new edition that has just like one new paragraph of information in it, but it totally disrupts the entire book, and you have to buy the new edition. New editions are always going to be more expensive than the used copies that your freaking friends around school are selling that they used, a few years back when they took a course. Alright, you want planned obsolescence. Every time they do a new version of some college textbook, alright, and I know we're all going bankrupt right now, it's not fucking the cost of the classes, it's those goddamn fucking textbooks that are bankrupting everyone right now. Anytime you see a new edition of a textbook and you have to buy it new, that's planned obsolescence. That's using planned obsolescence to rape your wallet. But anyways, price fixing. Back to price fixing. It's a textbook conspiracy, and that's one that's been going on longer than the US has been a country. It's as old as economies themselves. But even as recently as 2007, British Airways and Virgin Atlantic were fined $300 million by the US Department of Justice for a conspiracy of price fixing. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The list goes on and on and on. Like after the BP oil spill, when BP was spraying highly toxic chemicals into the ocean that combined with the oil to sink the oil down to the bottom of the ocean. It's really bad for all the stuff at the bottom, for all of, the ecosystem at the bottom of the ocean. But they did that so that nobody would see it on the coast or be able to, take a helicopter out over the ocean and see all the oil at the top of the ocean. It's kind of like, sweeping when your mom says clean your room and you sweep it all under the bed. They had a big conspiracy to sweep all their bullshit under the bed. It was a conspiracy to mitigate the PR fallout. I could sit here and talk about corporate conspiracy for 3 hours, and that would just be going over shit from the last decade. Business is war, and is generally treated as such by its many participants. I expect companies and corporations to do whatever is in their best interest, regardless of the morality and regardless of the consumer's benefit. And to expect anything less, to be surprised by conspiracy, to write off conspiracy theorists, is naive, period. To chalk up these discrepancies and controversies to nothing more than tinfoil psychobabble is dangerous, counterproductive, and self-defeating. Like I said, business is war, and it is time we, the consumer, began to treat it as such, because we're getting fucking owned, like noobs. It is time we, the consumers, band together and draw a line in the sand, for divided we are powerless. Now, to be fair, I do not think that Activision's actions are on par with BP's in any way, but nonetheless their actions are a big part of, if not the biggest part, of what is rapidly degrading the quality of our industry, the hobby we love. Activision is engaged in what I think of as sort of the inverse of price fixing, what I would call quality fixing. So instead of two companies raising the price of the same product, it's one company degrading the quality of two products in order to sell them both. Now, the official definition of planned obsolescence or built-in obsolescence in industrial design, and this is from Wikipedia, is a policy of planning or designing a product with an artificially limited useful life, like your ascendant materials, so it will become obsolete, that is, unfashionable or no longer functional after a certain period of time. The rationale behind the strategy is to generate long-term sales volume by reducing the time between repeat purchases, referred to as shortening the replacement cycle. Now let's think about that concept, the replacement cycle. I've talked before about how the easiest way to boost profits in today's markets was cutting costs, right? Because they're having trouble reaching new customers in new emerging markets overseas. They're sort of capped in the amount of customers here in the West, the North America and Western Europe. Now that's true, cutting costs is the easiest way, but the other method, once you've cut your costs as far as you can, your lean operating machine, is to take advantage of the replacement cycle. And now this requires a lot more precision planning, but the goal is to increase the amount of shit you are selling to your customers, right? The replacement cycle. You want to sell them something new every couple of months. Activision's doing a very good job of this right now. Activision's goal at this juncture is to increase the rate of that replacement cycle, to increase the rate at which you are replacing your video games with new video games. Now, in the past, they have been very effective with taking advantage of the annual replacement cycle. Before COD, they saw major success with the Guitar Hero games and the Tony Hawk games, both of which had an annual release system similar to that of COD, and then of course came COD itself. However, with the rise of DLC, the rate at which they are asking you to purchase new content and thus hoping that you've gotten tired of the content you already own, that content that, by the way, they sold you last month, has increased dramatically. Imagine you're trying to sell someone a pizza every night, but then one night you accidentally give them a pizza so big that they can put the leftovers in the fridge and eat it the next night for dinner too. And because they still have leftovers from the night before, they don't order a pizza that next night. Well, in the future, you're going to make sure that you keep your pizza small enough, not only because it cuts costs, smaller pizzas requires less effort to make. The analogy is a little wacky, but bear with me. You're going to keep your pizza small enough, it cut costs, but it also makes sure that the person has to refill their pizza every night, right? So you make sure you sell them a small pizza, so they finish that pizza that night, and then the next night they got to buy a new fucking pizza. Now, the rise of DLC by itself significantly contributed to this problem. But on top of that, this year, Activision is basically trying to sell you two of the same thing at the same time. It's bizarre. Two first-person shooter video games, along with a shitload of DLC for each game, all in the same year. So in order to increase the amount of shit that you're selling to each customer, you have to manage their levels of satisfaction by ensuring that they are finishing off whatever content was originally sold to them quickly enough so that they're bored enough to buy the next bit of content being sold to them. And it works out perfectly because not only does planned obsolescence increase the rate of the consumer replacement cycle, but as I was just talking about, it does in fact cut costs. So when this game first dropped in its vanilla state, it was widely panned and criticized, receiving 6 out of 10 reviews for two reasons. The first being that it didn't have very much content, because it didn't. In fact, if this video is too long for you, I honestly think everything I am trying to explain could be adequately summed up by the first 30 seconds of that Angry Joe review video, where he beats the game, screams, "What the fuck, that's it?" and then looks in the case to realize they are already aggressively trying to sell him the DLC with the little fucking banners they include in the case of the video game. And actually, it's worth mentioning, since my last video, it was brought to my attention that 2 more DLC areas have been glitched into that I just wanted to mention briefly. The King's Watch, which actually has an enemy spawned, interestingly enough, the Ultra Captain. This is the first time we've seen an enemy spawned in the cut content. And the Terminus area as well, and this is an interesting milestone because now over 75% of the content that will be in the House of Wolves has already been confirmed to be on disc. Assuming it's the same size as the Dark Below. And again, considering we had already found 75% of the Dark Below before it released, it should be pretty clear to everyone at this point that the entirety of both expansion packs was completed and burned onto that disc before launch. So hypothetically, had Destiny launched with the entirety of these 2 expansion packs accessible, how long would it have taken the average player to finish off all that content? Now, in a similar hypothetical we went over in the last video, I talked about how if Destiny had had to launch side by side with the GTA, they very well may have unlocked all this on-disc content from the start because they would have had to aggressively compete for people's playtimes. But when they launched unopposed and their only goal was to increase the rate of the replacement cycle, having that content accessible from launch would have been counterproductive to the ultimate goal of making as much money as possible. Because if you had had 3 raids from the start, how long would it have been before you got bored of the vanilla game and felt the need to buy DLC? And more importantly, how long would it have been before you felt compelled to buy Call of Duty? Think of Skyrim or Fallout games. Now imagine if Destiny had had as much content as a typical Skyrim game, measured in hours played. I mean, they had the same price tag after all, didn't they? If you could have spent as much time playing vanilla Destiny as you did vanilla Skyrim, how long would it have been before you had to buy a new game? You probably wouldn't have finished Destiny in time for COD. Now, the reason Skyrim has so much content and a game like Grand Theft Auto has so much content is because they're not worried about the replacement cycle. They're not going to come out with another game for like 5 years. Annual games will always suck cock. And I think COD and Destiny are as similar and as different as Skyrim and Fallout, right? It's the same open world formula, but with key differences in mechanics that change the experience. COD and Destiny are the same FPS format, but with key mechanical differences that genuinely change the experience. What if COD and Destiny had both launched with as much content measured in hours played as Skyrim and Fallout respectively? It would have taken you a long time to finish all that content, and that slows down the replacement cycle. It would be a long time before you had to buy the second game. You know, if Skyrim had come out in September and Fallout 3, or maybe I'll use Grand Theft Auto 5 as a better example, more of you have played it. All right, you have Skyrim in September, and then you have GTA in frickin' November, 2 months later. Would you have finished Skyrim in time to play Grand Theft Auto? how long would you have put off buying Grand Theft Auto because you were still playing Skyrim? It would be a long time before you had to buy the second game, and after you bought the second game, you have these 2 fat-ass games filled to the brim with content, it would be an even longer time before you had to buy any of the DLC. So the more content they give you, the less they can sell you. The better the game, the slower the replacement cycle. Destiny had an unacceptably low amount of content, and so did COD, and I want to briefly summarize some of the arguments I made in that Destiny vs. Advanced Warfare video, alright? Advanced Warfare did not ship with a proper cooperative mode. All it shipped with was the equivalent of combat training from Black Ops 1 and 2 and squads mode from Ghosts. Now, those games were able to include combat training in squads mode along with zombies and extinction as well. These full third game modes for cooperative play. And people point to MW3 and say, well, MW3 only had survival mode, but it didn't just have survival mode. It also had a few dozen Spec Ops missions as well, and those were a good few hours of playtime. Advanced Warfare is the first Call of Duty in franchise history to have a 3-year development period. It had more development time than any COD before it, and yet, ironically, this Call of Duty has shipped with the least amount of content in franchise history. The longest development period equals the least content. This is the future of gaming. It makes no sense. I mean, it does make sense. It makes no sense for us. It sucks for us. It's bad, but I'm trying to make sense of it, and I am making sense of it. Advanced Warfare couldn't ship with Exo Zombies because they had to make sure you were bored of that pizza before they sold you the Dark Below less than a month later. And with Exo Zombies, I thought that was a last-minute addition to save face because people were unhappy with Exo Survival. I was expecting basically what we got on the Riot map originally, Exo Survival with Zombies. I didn't think it was going to have its own map or be so advanced, but you know what? Exo Zombies is pretty fucking cool, and it's got some depth to it. What they did with the perks and the types of zombies and the map design, that doesn't seem like a last-minute decision at all. That seems like something that was in the works perhaps even before the game was completed, before it was launched. But they had to make sure they didn't give you too much pizza. They could not include it with the base game. And this is why modding is dead. You go back a decade, every major shooter had a strong modding community. Now none of them do, because modding was a lot of fun, and they don't want us having too much fun. You look back at a game like Black Ops 1, that game launched with the multiplayer, the campaign, 2 Zombies maps, and Dead Ops Arcade. And which, granted, I know not everyone loved Dead Ops Arcade, but for those of us who did fucking love it, I fucking loved Dead Ops Arcade. I bust a nut for Dead Ops Arcade. It was easily another 10 hours of gameplay trying to get to the highest round. That much content won't ship in a major FPS for some time to come. And I mean, you know, GTA 5 and Skyrim cost as much as Destiny. Ask yourself, when you compare the amount of content measured in hours played that these games offered, should Destiny really be priced at $60, the same as those other titles, when it only offers like a tenth of the amount of content? And so I just want to reiterate that this is the future Destiny is offering. Less and less content for more and more money. The better Destiny does in the short term, the more we all suffer for it in the long run. Please rate if you support the cause. This is Batman signing out.